Hi. I've decided to do my final paper on the autobiography of my mother, and I've decided to focus on the development of whether the development of the third space is at all possible. Um, and rather than reading it out loud to you, my abstract and my all of my setup quotes that I'm doing, I've decided to talk about it because I feel like it reveals more about the gaps in my argument than if I simply um, read it out loud. Because when I read it out loud, it sounds like my arguments to me are concealed under um, all of this language that makes it sort of more difficult verbally to determine the gaps in my argument, which I know exist. I know they exist. Anyway, so I'm going to be instead just sort of talking about it um, and working a little bit off of my outline. So I intend to. I view the autobiography of my mother as not fully being a Bildungsraum because of Jamaica Kincaid never really fully defines childhood and adulthood as um, states within which she exists. And therein she always seems to exist between this liminal space between childhood and adulthood, because to her, childhood can never fully be there because her mother passed away um, before she was born, and therein she never fully had a childhood as a result of that, and she never fully had an adulthood because according to her, you are never fully an adult until your parents die. So there's not necessarily this natural progression between childhood and adulthood, demarcated by this sort of coming of age. On another level, the term Bildungsraum is actually a German term, which refers to building space. And building space is very interesting because building space was actually used by, is associated with Hitler's Germany, and in so much as that Hitler wanted to create building room for Germany in the eradication of the Jews. And this building room is there in sort of a conquest term, like you are trying to take up space in which to grow. And I don't think that's necessarily possible for Suella because she lives within a colonized state, and therein the space has already been occupied. So the space, if she wanted to, it would have to be like a sort of reconquest of space. And I'm not fully sure if she's capable of doing that in her condition. Um, so um, I I want to also look at how she potentially shapes the third space, a space which I don't think necessarily exists because um, even though it may potentially exist, I will grant that. Um, I feel like there is a greater impact of social economic conditions than is being taken into consideration, as well as political stations within which one is. Because even though one might be capable of individually creating a third space, that space might not be recognized. And therein, it doesn't necessarily, even if one creates a third space or an individual identity, it's not acknowledged. So it has no agency. And I feel that Baba is altogether too positive, in my opinion, because um, he sort of views there as being no possibility for um, he believes there as being a possibility for the creation of a third space, even within conditions of great poverty, and that seems to me very, very questionable. And it's very, like, it's almost like Spivak is the complete realist, and over here you have Homi Baba, who's like happiness. And so I am going to consider the creation of the third space as potentially possible for Suella or potentially not possible. And I'm going to explore this primarily within the functions of language, because she uses language in order to create and shape her hybrid identity, mainly in saying I'm not this and I'm not that, and therein creating this sort of new identity based off of that, but an identity which doesn't necessarily have language associated with it, and therefore lacks a certain amount of agency. And the ways in which I'm going to explore her um, the liminal space within which she exists, and her potential creation of a third space is through her relationship um, with others in the text, beginning with her relationship with her mother, which paints her as a victim and um, leads to dissatisfaction and ultimately emptiness. And also leads her to take on the embodiment of her mother and therein paint herself as a victim. Next, I will look at her ties to her father and show how her father, who is not in her life, is also idolized, but loses this idolization as soon as he becomes a reality. And we notice in this particular strange relationship that the problem between there's an essential problem between the colonized and the colonizer. Um, Next, I will look at her relationship with her brothers, who present an image of masculinity and a portrait of the limitations of our freedom. I will probably also incorporate what Dr. Irwin sent me in the email this morning about potentially seeing it as a confession, as a sort of confessional narrative, and that her colonized state is also has multitudes of layers, and one of them is the fact that she's not only colonized, but she's also female. And I might also look at it in terms of here in this particular section as maybe not necessarily being only a self-inflicted space, colonization, but that she also takes on the role of the colonized. It's not only a role that is given to her, unlike femininity. Um, so next, I will look at her relationship with her sexual partners, who plays to question her womanhood and her relationship with love, and allow her to discover that she desires independence above all else. Next, I am going to look at her strange relationship with her adoptive mothers, and try to understand why and how her attachment is so strong to these women, whether embedded within love and hate, which we've seen in all of them, in all three of her replacement mother narratives. And finally, I will look at the relationship with the community, um, which comes at an apex at the end of the novel, with her identification of death as a means of relating to others and constructing agency. I think her relationship with the community is probably, out of all of them, even her relationship with her mothers and her adoptive mothers, the most interesting, because it's sort of intertwined between all of her relationships with all of the separate individuals, and it sort of creates this, almost because of her hybrid identity, this almost um, capability of viewing both ends of the spectrum of like both colonized and colonizer, and that that act sort of reveals the almost Hobbes-like state in which these people exist, in which they're so interested in self-interested, and they only believe that friendships and relationships are necessary for their own survival. And it becomes very interesting um, on another level, in so much as her relationship with her community is ultimately how she receives agency, but she never fully is capable of identifying with these people to the degree that um, would allow her to have an identity within this community. So these are my hopes to explore within the paper. I think it will be extraordinarily interesting. At least I'm hoping. I hope I will hear from all of you. Um, have a great week.